The galaxy had never known loss. The fabled creatures from the dark depths of space had defeated many worlds, searched the strongest life forms for entertainment. Every fresh conquest was a challenge, a test of their superior abilities. They never failed. Their physical force and pack mentality made them unstoppable, and hence when they gazed upon Earth, they did not hesitate. Earth was a primitive planet they lived on, governed by weak and delicate species. The predators thought it would be simple. Another mark on their vast list of successes arrived silently, unnoticed in the atmosphere. Their strategy was basic: hunt, demolish, and leave quiet. Their first blow behind nothing. Swift human cities were not ready for an onslaught of such scope in a few minutes. Neighborhoods were devastated, homes collapsed, streets flooded with terror, and people scattered. The predators moved, using their cloaking technology to remain invisible as they targeted their favorites they loved. The terror in their prey, yet humans, unprepared, were not totally helpless. They hurried to assemble some sort of defense army, mobilized air soldiers sent to the streets, firing their weapons at shadows, unaware of what they were even aiming at. Forces were used, fighting against, yet their efforts seemed futile. Their speed unsurpassed, their armor was unbreakable. Played with the military forces of Earth as though they were a game, to them it was in the amidst the turmoil. The people sought to organize. International leaders broadcasted in dire need for peace, but fearing instead spread like wildfire. Knowledge of what had come on their planet was limited to knowing it was fatal. Families gathered in basements, while others sought to escape to the forest, away from the cities they never knew about. That the predators were everywhere, observing, waiting for each prey, gave fresh excitement. Though their overwhelming domination, something unusual started to happen, and the predators started to observe minor disturbances. The people were responding sloppily, but with astonishing tenacity. Some of them had been able to wrap one of their species. It wasn't deadly, but it was sufficient to draw the attention of the predator leader. How could such a feeble species display, even though they disregarded it right away? Hint of opposition perplexed them. Surely it was nothing more than chance. After all, humans could not reasonably constitute a major threat. They were only prey. Its prey could never beat the hunter. The initial days of the invasion were a whirl of fire and blood. The predators deliberately halted human communities, decreasing their population. Among the carnage, whispers started to proliferate among the invaders, tales of a human not running, who failed to hide, a human who battled back with deftness and accuracy. It was a foolish concept. No one human could question them. But the stories developed that a lone person had passed across the area like a ghost. Complete city patrols had been destroyed without any sign of who or what had done it. The evidence left behind did not make sense. The people were too efficient and too clean. Expected to be disorderly, searching for survival, this was different. The predators brushed off the early claims, linking the losses to not being used for hunting, environmental risks, or equipment faults. But shortly the events become hard to overlook, something plucking them one by one in a way they hadn't encountered before. The predator leader gave orders for an inquiry. Their army was dispatched out. Larger groups would find their senses sharpened, weapons drawn, would discover this. So-called fatal human beings had started the hunt for the biggest menace to Earth, although the pursuit had turned into an example. Predators still felt they had the upper hand, while humans, on the other hand, were still chaotic and lacked organized strategy to fight these invaders. Yet among the anarchy, some people started to observe the same. Strange pattern reports poured in of a mystery figure observed around the margins of the most cruel. While some claimed it was merely a rumor, others, forlorn hope in a moment of need, thought it was true, a quiet guardian reversing the course of the war against the predators. Concurrently, the predators were blinded by their conceit and stayed ignorant of just how close this threat was. They had never confronted it. Was only a matter of time before the human opponent who could outsmart them and match them in ability population was wiped out totally. But Earth was unlike the other planets they had subjugated. The people were not like they apparently were not giving up. They rebounded with whatever they possessed: firearms, improvised traps, everything to slow down the predators' expected pace. They would break readily, but the humans were hanging on longer than would have been imagined. This intrigued development deep within. The core of the anarchy the Deadliest human planned was personal rather than a struggle for life. The predators had brought war to their homeland, and this human would not support. Every action the predators made toward victory only stoked the flames within the human being who had spent years preparing for events like these, when accuracy and plans were everything. The predators were strong. However, power by itself wasn't enough to ensure victory. Nonetheless, this human was driven to take advantage of their shortcomings. More than brute force to prevail in this conflict, and while the predators celebrated their technical excellence, the deadly human waited, observing. Calculated predators thought Earth belonged to them. The taking they were unaware of one of Earth's own had already flipped the odds. The hunt had only started, but they were the prey. The predators knew they were not the hunters they knew. Things were starting to alter. What they had always seen as a basic quest was spiraling out of their reach. Despite their technology and brutal strategies, something was odd about this planet. The humans, though chaotic and initially, they disregarded the scattered displays of resiliency the predators had not expected. Science kept tracking down the people one by one, stalking cities. Whispers within their ranks began to spread as entire squads vanished from view. Patrols were vanishing more and more. It was hard to maintain ignoring someone or anything without a trace. Selecting them with deliberate accuracy, the predator troops' leaders became nervous. They had miscalculated this planet. Humans were not the weak prey they had expected. They were evolving. The rules were altered, so how could one fight back from this? Normally, hunt reports arriving were disturbing. It was not only that people were rebuffing, it was how they were doing. The deadliest human has made known this wasn't some hapless survivor. Getting lucky here was a sharp tactical mind for the predators at work. Saw numerous species on their hunts, but nothing like this. Their superior numbers and technology should have assured of a rapid triumph, but suddenly they were being outwitted. The deadliest human didn't fight like the others they came across. They lacked brute force, and instead battled with desperation or terror they lacked. Knowing they couldn't win that way, they waited and studied instead. Every action the predators took was matched by a more intelligent human, using their surroundings in ways the predators couldn't strike when least expected, one by one, or plan traps utilizing the terrain to their advantage. The predators fell. It was not instantaneous, it was not dramatic, it was computed. Deadliest human was not interested in performing a show targeted on effectively eradicating the menace. Methodically, the predators who used to see people as simple prey came to see they were facing something considerably more deadly. The predator leader, previously confident, was becoming nervous. He couldn't comprehend how one human could be doing such devastation on their forces when the humans as a whole were still disorganizing. This one differed. They had to stop, but how could they send more teams, split their every action? Not working. The deadliest human expected their every movement into smaller groups just made the hunters more susceptible. The defensive posture they were in came from not used to their terror of the human growing every time they felt they had the upper hand. The deadliest human was already ahead for the human. This was no longer only survival, it was a mission. They had observed what the predators had done to their homeland. There weren't fighting for a cause or a nation, since the only means to stop the carnage was this. Though their technology was remarkable, every predator that dropped represented one less menace to the last traces of humanity. The human possessed something they lacked: flexibility, for which they did not rely just on tools or machinery. Weapon was their thinking. The predators depended on superior tools and physical force, while the human used created and used the most lethal. Human turned against the predator's own conceit. The predators thought they were unbeatable. They had never seen an opponent capable of testing them on a cerebral level, but this guy had studied them, understanding their shortcomings. They took advantage of every weakness or presumption the predators had about Earth. Thus, they stopped hunting animals on far-off planets fighting wars, or in the jungle, were something else totally. They were now engaged in by a species they had written off as negligible. The predators were rapidly losing. Once well-planned attacks became frantic efforts to find the guy accountable for their losses notwithstanding. The more they tried, the more they fell into the trap set for them. The deadliest human moved like a shadow. They never stayed in one area for very long, never directly interacted in fight. Unless absolutely required, they wore the predators down gradually, each success a subtle but deliberate reminder. Modest one, but together they started to alter the tide. The predators were utilized for quick successes, and this extended battle was saps their morale. They had begun this hunt with hope, thinking they would eradicate humanity in a few days. But today the days span weeks, and the human resistance was not disintegrating the way the predators' irritation evolved into terror. Not used to be on the losing side of a hunt, and they lacked knowledge on handling, the predator leader knew there had to be action. They couldn't afford to lose more of their army. The deadliest human had to be stopped, else the whole mission would fail. The boss demanded directly. Assault, not waiting, no more subtlety. They would hunt down the human with all they possessed, except the human. They had anticipated this action. The predators made was expected, and the human knew how to take use of that. As the predators assembled for their last effort, were unaware they were directly approaching another trap, the most lethal kind. Human had enticed them exactly like they had done with every other patrol, and exactly as before the predators would collapse. This would be a complete unit instead of one by one this time. Once certain of their dominance, predators suddenly had to deal with their circumstances. They were losing this planet, and the prey they had assumed to be beneath them had changed the tide, underappreciated mankind's resiliency, and now they were paying the most terrible human cost. Menace they possessed that the predators could no more overlook. Never seen anything like this, their search was now survival rather than a fun. The deadliest human has lowered every strategy they used was expected from their once confident forces to a ghost of their previous power. Refuted single action resulted in another loss. What began as a basic invasion turned into now a lethal game of chess. They were losing piece by piece. The frustrated and desperate predator leader assembled of their elite squad. What was left? They had tried everything but nothing worked. This guy was clearly a trained warrior, someone who had been taught, not simply a random survivor. Getting ready for events like these, the revelation was humble, but it also inspired afresh. While the predators would stop at nothing to finish, they would recover their supremacy. The deadliest human being was informed of their every movement for every squad they dispatched. The human was already 3 steps ahead of the predators. Once their main advantage was technology, the human had learned it to be a drawback. How can one deceive sensors by means of decoys and misleading signals? And they believed they had the human cornered. Dealt another terrible loss the predators were. Their desperation was evident in every deed they gave up from their customary regulated behavior, becoming reckless strategies and started hunting with sheer ferocity. This was exactly what the human had been anticipating. For the more emotional the predators were, easier to forecast the deadliest human had examined. It was about shattering their mentality, rather than only overcoming them physically bit by bit. That's exactly what the predator troops once dreaded across the galaxy. Under the strain, were disintegrating. There were no more confident hunters. They were terrified, disorganized, and losing control. The predator leader, but wasn't ready to give up. They still felt their dominance even when the data was showing otherwise. Against them, all the available forces would be mustered for one last push. Focused in one attack meant to overwhelm the human. It was a desperate gamble, but they had no option. Choices still to be made. But as always, the human expected this. They knew the predators were becoming increasingly desperate, and desperation resulted in errors. The human did not wait for the last attack to arrive at them. They were not acting carelessly. They headed directly for the core of the predator forces. It was determined that the deadliest human realized he needed to kill the leader the predators were ready for, expecting a fight. But they were not ready for this. The humans swept across their ranks like a ghost, hitting precisely, and once proud and strong hunters, they were now faltering in uncertainty, trying to find. Before they could react, as the human drew in on the predator leader, the leader understood the truth they were not seeing. The ones under control now, this human so-called prey, had turned the script the predators had written. Became the target for hunting. There was no escape during the last clash. Inevitable, the leader, eager to restore their pride, stood their position. But the deadliest human possessed all the benefits. Every mistake in the predator's design already meant too late. Plan revealed every flaw taken advantage of by the human attackers. Swift, ruthless, and decisive, the predator commander battled with all they possessed. Still, the result was never in dispute. The human was too knowledgeable, too experienced, and too driven to fail. At last, the predator commander collapsed exactly as all the others, simply marked the end of the hunt. It was not a great victory. The leader left the remaining predators without direction. They split away. Earth was no longer the helpless victim they had originally believed would be an easy conquest. Thought it to be the worst human display they had seen. Humanity was not to be undervalued. The predators left in humiliation, their reputation destroyed across. The narrative that would be told would be the galaxy words disseminated of the human who had defeated the most dreaded hunters. It was reminded for generations that there is always a way to prevail, regardless of how strong or advanced an enemy seems to be. The deadliest human, it wasn't about fame or glory, it was about survival, regarding safeguarding their territory. The predators arrived on Earth expecting a basic hunt, but discovered something far more deadly than they had ever dreamed. They had discovered a human who refused to give up. The war was over, but the human stayed alert. Fresh dangers would always exist. Rivals seeking a challenge, but now they would know, they would recall what happened here. Earth was no more a simple target. It was guarded by a human who had shown that even the toughest of hunters could be outmatched, outwitted, and defeated the predators. They would never forget this loss. They would talk of it in subdued tones, alerting people of the risks of undervaluing mankind and for the fight. Lethal human life would continue, always ready for the next battle, always ready. The hunt had finished for whatever the galaxy might throw their way, but the legend had only started for the predators. Regrouped, but everyone knew they had been outmaneuvered, and they were no more the hunters in this fight. Their army was disorganized and their captain had fallen, outwitted and outmatched by one human. It wasn't only regarding numbers now. The moral had changed, and they were terrified a sentiment that was alien to them on any other planet they had invaded. There was no hiding place. Now they spoke in quick whispers, moving in closer configurations devoid of longer assured in their superior strength. The fiercest human was always on watch somewhere. Darkness, every sound pushed them into a panic they were now fighting to rather than merely for control. Surviving the scariest human didn't allow them time to recover. The human knew how. How to keep the enemy off balance and maintain pressure on them was not about waging major battles or direct confrontations, not the means of victory. Instead, the humans attacked where they least expected it. Always keeps them wondering. Psychological warfare was it. Though physically strong, the predators once fearless were being mentally broken apart as much as physically. Originally expecting an easy hunt, they were the ones under hunt today. And it was destroying them every day. Lost patrols disappeared without a trace. Technology failing in ways they couldn't comprehend. They were used to govern the battlefield, but here on this weird planet. Inhospitable planet the battlefield belonged to, the human, the deadly, had turned the entire surroundings against them. Earth was now a weapon the human used, not just a planet. Predators had overlooked deep woodlands, urban ruins turned into mazes. That confused their forces. Even the weather worked against them, with storms hiding the humans' motions and running out of time and choices. Blinding their sensors, the predators had hoped to rapidly conquer Earth, but the more this dragged on, the more vulnerable supplies became to be. Their confidence was destroyed. The worst of all, their equipment was being damaged. Human had them under control. They knew the surviving predator commanders gathered what forces they needed. Their strategy had been to gently bring the human toward a last confrontation. Every predator still able to fight was used as bait and set up a large trap employing themselves. They thought the humans' confidence would be their undue, since they would make a mistake by confronting them head on. Yet the deadliest human never made mistakes. The human had researched every action they took was expected. Predators believed they were cunning, but the humans spotted right away their scheme and did not enter the trap. Rather, the predators waited anxiously for the human to show up, while piece by piece they destroyed it, but nothing happened. Days went by and their expected battle became intolerable. But all they received was stillness, once their greatest advantage. That silence became a cause of terror. They discovered too late that the human was among them, traversing their ranks. Invisible until the time they came to know what was happening. It was over. The human had turned their concentration of energies into a catastrophic explosion, burst through their own trap. Their camps and ranks plunged into anarchy. Some sought to defend, but their enemy. Others tried to flee. But there was nowhere to go. The human moved with lethal precision, removing important targets and sending the predators into total chaos. From their once formidable army was reduced to a running for their life. Terrified crowd had never been so helpless, thus totally defeated. This was more than simply a loss. It was a humiliation. The predator commanders, understanding they had no chance of victory, issued the directive to withdraw. Their troops rushed to flee, deserting their dead friends behind the rubble of their failed invasion. They had arrived on Earth with such haughtiness, thinking they were invincible. Now they were running beaten and shattered. The deadliest human watched them pass, knowing the struggle was finished. It was not only about living. Once the most feared hunters in the galaxy had been, this was a victory the predators will remember. Brought to their knees by a singular individual, they would never forget this loss, and neither would anyone else. The failure of predators swiftly extended over the galaxy. Species that had formerly inhabited of these hunters started to discuss the human who had reversed the predators' reputation's damage. And they understood that, although they had previously been the ones establishing the guidelines determining who lived and who passed away, now has been demonstrated that even the few surviving predators left their barely operational ships vulnerable. Following human interference, they refused to dare look back. Earth, the world they had once laughed upon, was now the site of their greatest failing. They never returned. The galaxy, enormous, but Earth had become a place they worried they would urge others not to make the struggle their narrative of choice. Same error for the deadliest person. There was no grand celebration of victory. It had never been about glory. It was about defending their homeland. People, the predators, had undervalued humanity and suffered the cost. After the search, human had done what was required. Earth was safe for now. Deep down the human knew, but others were still to come. Out there, seeing this victory, one would convey a message to the galaxy, but also draw fresh dangers the galaxy would face. Human was ready for them. They had shown that regardless of the enemy's strength, no matter how hazardous the search, they would always defend their galaxy. Had learnt that day humanity were not prey. Hence Earth was not undervalued. The predators were gone. However, their presence had a long-lasting effect on Earth since their destruction was extensive and their scars. Every city was in ruins, and many lives had been lost during invasion. Lost yet in spite of everything humanity had endured, the most menace the galaxy had always known and emergent victorious, all thanks to the most terrible human tales of the human quickly spreading. Deeds became legendary symbols of hope and resiliency. People spoke in silence. Tones on how one individual had unilaterally reversed the tide against an opponent that seemed unbeatable. Narrative that enabled those reconstructing their houses, people who had lost loved ones, and those who had once felt depressed. The human had proven even in the worst of times, there was always opportunity for success. Predators paid the ultimate cost for generations. They had been dreaded and had undervalued Earth across the galaxy, but their loss had altered the balance of power in ways they couldn't have predicted. That fear was broken. Once scared of the predators, having imagined other creatures now saw an opportunity. They considered Earth as a location of strength, a planet that had accomplished the impossible, and they observed the deadliest human as a person to be revered or terrified. The galaxy noticed far ally cultures observed closely the failure of the predator outside our atmosphere had caused waves in the sky, and everyone was discussing the human who had overcome them. Others took it as an omen that humanity was more hazardous than some had thought. Others were intrigued about, wondering what made this planet and its people so strong. Yet the scariest human had little interest in the attention. Their concentration stayed on Earth, making sure it was free from potential hazards. They did not pursue glory or celebrity. Though the predators might have been pushed away, the human understood there were more threats hiding in the galaxy. Others might even be more clever and stronger. Eventually focusing on Earth, the predators had learnt their lesson the hard way, and they wouldn't go back to the handful that had survived their loss to share the news, warning others of the person who had outwitted and outmatched them. Earth was now a planet of legend, a world with against the strongest warriors of the galaxy, one running the danger of attracting additional notice from those who wished to question humanity's newfound reputation. Understood this better than anyone. Their efforts had resulted in the conflict being far gone rather than the battle had been won. From over, they understood that dangers always loomed large in the emptiness. Some would come looking for revenge, others would come out of curiosity, still others would come to see themselves tested against the person who had grown to be a legend. Despite the weight of this knowledge, the human stayed vigilant. They had survived after facing the worst the galaxy could provide and learnt from the predators, tailored to their strategies, and applied their own abilities to flip the tide. Today, they were more robust, since the predators had imparted insightful survival tactics knowledge to them, and lessons in patience that would help them in the fights yet to come. Yet, there was more to the human's victory than just that. It was the human spirit, not only physical power or cunning strategy, reluctance to give up, the will to fight back, even if the chances were stacked against us, and had really turned the day. Though the predators had considered humans as weak, vulnerable animals, they lacked knowledge of the power of that spirit. Was something they couldn't measure or get ready for, and ultimately it brought them down. When Earth started to reconstruct, the human kept cooking, knowing the galaxy was observing. The word of their victory had spread far and wide. It was just a matter of time before someone else arrived to oppose them. The human wasn't terrified. They had confronted death and emerged stronger on the other side. They would then be ready. Why the myth of the deadliest person developed. Stories of the lone person who had opposed the most hated predators across the stars told of one delivered the tale as a warning, others as inspiration. But regardless of how it was told, the message was clear: humans should not be undervalued. The predators had considered Earth would be a simple target. They had missed the most deadly human had exhibited. Those whose technology is superior yet whose forces are insufficient could still be vanquished. Was a lesson the galaxy will not soon overlook, but for the human it was about the tale focused on something else than being the brightest or strongest, rather on safeguarding their planet so that the galaxy would remain strong whatever dangers arrived on Earth. Though the human knew one thing for sure, that Earth would never fall, they still carried hazards yet unknown. Now the predators knew it was only a matter of time until others arrived to evaluate themselves against the person who had become a legend. But the most lethal human wasn't worried. They had shown that no matter who arrived, regardless of the strength the enemy humanity would muster, and as the human gazed up at the stars, they knew that someplace else fresh dangers were accumulating, but they were ready. Earth had experienced the worst and survived. The worst person would be there to protect it regardless of circumstances. Arrived next, the hunt was finished, but the battle had just started.